the Jerusalem Post, other Israeli media this week came out with, a lot of reportage about how is the Israeli army, the Northern Command, has quote achieved all of its war goals in Lebanon, um, and now they're like, they're gonna do the rational thing and try to negotiate a lasting ceasefire with Hezbollah. Um, Meanwhile, as you pointed out, the new recruits to the army bases stepping off the bus and never stepping back on. Uh, Hezbollah fighters popping up inside a house that was taken over by Israeli soldiers. What can we say about Israel's supposed achievement of any of its war goals in Lebanon, and why would the Northern Command and Yoav Gallant and all these people be insisting that they have achieved victory?
I'm still waiting for them to declare that they want anything more than to secure the border, which was always an operation to secure the physical border along the blue line was always going to need to happen for Israel to move their settlers back into the settlements in the north. And so that to me is not a surprising development. Bombing civilians is not a surprising development to me. Everything that happened in Lebanon has been happening in Lebanon. They killed more than 100 people in Baalbek yesterday. The day before, they killed some 50 or 60 in Tyre, Sur in South Lebanon. And of course, the attacks on the Dahia in Beirut have been brutal. And they're attacks against civilians, against civilian infrastructure, civilian buildings, and banks, as we reported on the show last week. But in terms of face-to-face ground maneuver fighting, Israel is so far not doing what it did in 2006 when it rolled across the border and attempted to encircle Beit Jabal and collapse Hezbollah. They're not making statements of that sort in this battle. If you just, Chief of Staff Halevi just said the other day, he said, in the north, there is a possibility of reaching a sharp end. We have finished Hezbollah's senior chain of command in a very thorough way. So they're using words like that, like we can end this. And I think that they don't have they don't have the stomach or the courage for the kind of war that Hezbollah is going to bring to them. Hezbollah is not going to bring that war to them on the border. But when they move up into the villages of South Lebanon, they're going to get a fierce battle. And I don't think Israel is in a position to fight that battle a year and a month into this war with, declining popularity, reservists. If you look at the stats coming out this week, the batches of soldiers killed 5 at a time, they're all reservists. A lot of them were our age. Their army cannot sustain that kind of death toll for months long. And that's why Halevi is talking to his population saying that there's a possibility of there being an off-ramp for this because but when you say off-ramp, you have to think about the fact that they've killed 3,000 people in Lebanon. They've destroyed buildings all over Beirut. And so the thing that I'm specifically talking about is a large-scale ground maneuver deep into Lebanon. The Litani River is 40 kilometers north, and some battle plans said that the goal was to push Hezbollah beyond the Litani River. That is not going to happen.
No.
Anything, I would say they're saying they're at 3 or 4 kilometers. I would say start paying attention when they're at 5 to 10 kilometers, and the death toll in those increments, going 5 kilometers and pushing into places like Ait Shab, Beit Jabal, Khiam. They're going to be a vicious fight and defensive positions and more than Israel can handle. But the border itself, Hezbollah is not supposed to be on the border itself. So to evaluate them about a border as if it's the front door of your house and you need to protect that front door is not the way to analyze this. It's forest that Israel can move through before they're in the villages fighting face to face. They have been fighting sometimes
Yeah.
face to face, but they are the exception that proves that what we're seeing is mostly standoff fire still now,
Yeah.
30 days into this operation.
Yeah, what's so striking to me about the Lebanon front is that the Lebanese resistance lost its entire leadership, lost affect most of its senior leaders, including of course Said Hassan Nasrallah, and it doesn't seem to have made difference to the fighting troops. I mean, I'm sure it has meant a lot to them, but in terms of the defense of the front lines, the picture you're painting, John, is and the reality on the ground that Israel's barely able to step across the border before it has to, before it's repelled. It's so striking, the resilience of the Lebanese resistance, of the fighters on the ground.
If you were to
Well,
just judge by field reports, you from Hezbollah field reports, say you didn't know anything about what happened in Beirut, if you just followed field reports from day to day to day, you wouldn't see any change. It's not like the day
You
there was,
wouldn't have known they lost
you
Yeah.
wouldn't
lost the
know.
leadership.
No, you wouldn't know it by statistics, by quality of operation, by number of operation. They're delivered on the same time every day. You wouldn't see it. And these kind of comments by the Israeli generals saying that there's 20% of their rocket capacity, that is a joke. And
Yeah.
even for his own dignity, he should not be saying things
I
like
mean,
that.
it's not our role to advise the Israelis, but it
If
kind
I
of
were, I would say don't do that. That you look like an idiot doing that.
yeah, it kind of makes you think that if the Zionists were smart, they would retreat now, because they can point to, they could, like you were saying, John, like they're talking to their population, and maybe they are lining this up, but they can point to concrete achievements from their perspective that they've made. That in terms of they can exaggerate these things, but in terms of the 20%, which I agree seems completely nonsensical, but they can say, we took out the leadership, etc., etc., and they can say, well, we always did say it was only going to be a limited operation. They can point to these kind of things, whereas the longer they stay, the more they're going to be dragged into the quagmire, and the longer they do that, the more they resist. They risk a humiliating defeat and disorganized retreat.
well, I mean, they can't do that because Hezbollah is not going to play by their rules. And I think maybe we should talk about what Naim Qassem, the new Secretary General, said about Hezbollah said this morning or
Yeah.
afternoon in Beirut in his first speech as Secretary General, because it's very indicative. It sort of answers a lot of questions about what the strategy will be and on what terms that Hezbollah might agree to a ceasefire. And I watched the speech and I made some notes, and I'll just sort of hit a few. I mean, it was quite a long speech. It was almost an hour long. So I'll just hit what I think are some of the key points. Obviously, he paid very high tribute to Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, his predecessor, as well as to Hisham Safiuddin, who was expected to be Nasrallah's successor, but who was killed very quickly just a few days after. He, of course, paid tribute to Yahya Sinwar as well as to Ismail Haniyeh, the assassinated or the martyred leaders of Hamas. And of Sinwar, he said, this is what Naim, Naim Qassem said. He said he was martyred in confrontation until until the last breath, and he said he terrified the enemy during his imprisonment and in his freedom, and he will continue to terrify the enemy after his martyrdom. I thought that was such a striking statement. And then he addresses very directly. He says the question will naturally arise is what will the policy be now that there's a new Secretary General? And he says, my program is the continuation of the program of our leader, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, in all fields: political, military struggle, cultural, social. We will continue to implement the war plans that he put in place with the leadership of the resistance. And he, off the bat, is very firm that there's going to be no abandonment of Gaza, no separate peace by Hizballah, which is, of course, what the Americans and the Israelis are trying to do. And he says it was a duty to confront the danger Israel poses to the whole region through the doorway of Gaza, and because it is the right of the people of Gaza that everyone should support them. So he's making the case that we should be supporting Gaza as a moral question, as an ethical question. He says it's a Arab value, it's a Muslim value, it's an ethical value. But at the same time, he makes the case again that Nasrallah used to make, that if they defeat Gaza, that's just the first step. Then they're going to come for everyone. So it's in the strategic interest of the region to defend Gaza. And he says, no one should ask us, why did you support them, meaning Gaza? But rather they should ask the others, why are you not supporting the people of Gaza? So he's very firm that this front in support of Gaza is going to continue. Then he addresses, again, critics in Lebanon. This is something we saw Nasrallah do in most of his speeches, where he'd address kind of like, I don't know, for want of a better word, the fifth column in Lebanon, who are always questioning Hizballah, claiming that they're dragging Lebanon into trouble and they could have stayed out of it. And he addresses that in detail, and he makes a very important point. He uses language which I don't know if Nasrallah used. He probably did, but it struck me in this speech. I mean, he makes the case that he says, look, since the 2006 war, Israel has violated Lebanese sovereignty by land and by air 39,000 times, and that's according to UN figures. So he says, like, how can you accuse us of provoking Israel when Israel is overflying Lebanon hundreds of times a week, gathering intelligence, gathering targeting data, and Israeli generals and media leaders are constantly, he's talking about even before the Al-Aqsa flood, constantly threatening to attack Lebanon and saying a war with Lebanon is inevitable, but we're going to choose the time for it, meaning Israel. And Naim Qassem says, he also talks about, and this is a point that we've mentioned before, how had there been no resistance, there would already be Israeli settlers in Lebanon. And he also makes the point that the resistance came after the Israeli invasion. There was no Hezbollah in 1982. But he says, quote, with resistance, we disrupt Israel's plans, and we are capable of that. But by waiting with the excuse that we don't want to give Israel a pretext to attack, we lose everything. It is better for us to have a resistance with the capability of defensive attack instead of waiting and doing nothing until Israel attacks us. So he's putting forward sort of like the best defense is a good offense kind of strategy. And he also puts the battle in Lebanon and Gaza in a bigger context. He says, today in Gaza and Lebanon and the region, we are facing a huge scheme. This is not merely an Israeli war against Lebanon and Gaza. This is an Israeli, American, European world war, which brings to bear all their means on a global level in order to destroy the resistance and our people in the region. This is an American-Israeli plan that is completely adopted by America. And then he says, he goes back to talking about Gaza, and he says, how can 43,000 martyrs and 100,000 injured not shake the whole world? It is not possible to sit on the sidelines and watch. We must confront them. It is true that in confrontation there is pain, there are sacrifices, but imagine if we did not resist. They want us to surrender and to rule over our lives and our future generations. And then he says, the legendary resistance in Gaza and Lebanon, that is what will make the future of our generations, God willing. And then, I mean, there's a lot more he says. He speaks for a whole hour, but the key message here is very firm commitment to the resistance. They are not going to slow down their support front in support of Gaza, and they may well escalate. And he at the end of the speech, he addresses the resistance families in Lebanon, the families of the resistance fighters, and he says, you know, you're bearing a heavy burden, and this is costly, but we're fighting on our land. He says, we are fighting on our land in our own interest to defend our land and our freedom. We're not fighting on behalf of anyone else. And then this is, of course, to address those who constantly claim that Hizballah is a tool of Iran. And he has this one very funny line that kind of reminded me of sort of Hassan Nasrallah's humor. And I'll end with this. He says, he asks rhetorically, have any Arab countries offered us weapons and we said no? Did any Western or Eastern countries offer us weapons and we said no? So in other words, he's saying, Iran supports us. They do it out of conviction. We really appreciate it. They pay a high price for that. And we're very grateful to them, but they don't ask anything of us in return. And, if others came and offered us support, we'd take it. So it was a very firm and clear speech, I think.
What differences between leadership can we assess, even at this very early stage, between Nasrallah and Qassem? What are your thoughts, Ali and John and Asa?
Well, I'll just say, in terms of what Naim Qassem said, he stressed continuity. He thanked the Hizballah Shura Council, which is its governing council, for appointing him. He constantly stressed the collectiveness of the leadership and how the war plan that Nasrallah put in place with the resistance, with the leaders of the resistance, in other words, this is a collective plan, is the plan that they're implementing. He also talked about the size and the scale of Hizballah. He said it's a huge organization with many departments in every walk of life, and that was to stress that this is not an organization that you just kill the leader and it goes away.
Mm-hmm.
He was also frank in terms of, he said, we did suffer very severe blows with the pager attacks and the assassinations, but we regrouped, we reorganized according to our plans. He talked about how, he said, we still have first generation or first rank leaders, but we have so many of the second rank leadership. Don't worry, in other words, this organization, he emphasized that this organization is going to survive even the most severe loss of leadership. So it was really continuity is what he stressed.
Yeah.
Naim Qassem has always struck me as a continuity figure anyway. So, I mean, I think that those sort of messages will play well with his local and regional base after the blows that the organization has received in recent months.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They have a durable Shura Council. Hamas is in many ways the same. They have a collective leadership structure that is very durable, and it's built that way because they anticipate fighting this battle till victory. You can't have cult of personality leadership that changes one way or the other depending on who's the leader. Like, you can have important leaders, but they're all in consultation. Nasrallah was all in deep consultation with many people, and the assassination spree that Israel went on showed that. It showed the world that he's meeting with all of these key figures all the time. He's not making decisions from up on high and ordering people to do things. There's a durability, a resiliency within the Shura structure, the overlapping Shura structures of the military, social, and political organization. So, and I think, Naim Qassem is a very logical example. He's a public face of the group. He has been for a long time. He's been speaking for a long time as the public face of the group. He's a historian of the group. I think it's a very logical choice after the death of Hisham Saifuddin.